Chris Evans and I go back a long way. Chris Evans is an extension forester, and I'm going to read his bio. He's an extension forester and a research specialist at the University of Illinois, and he really has a varied experience level. I first knew him as an invasive species coordinator. His work with forest health, he's right on that cutting edge with forest health and invasive species. If it grows, he knows what it is and he knows how to kill it. But he's addicted to maple now, and that's really how we started our journey together. Is when I was at Iowa State, and Chris has an incredible following. He's kind of like a cult leader down there in Southern Illinois, making a lot of maple syrup, and Chris and I have run some events down there. You'd think Southern Illinois probably not going to get a big turnout, and I was shocked at the amount of people that come out just to hear Chris speak and really the growing maple. And so I've asked him to talk a little bit about home scale ROs. Now, if you're out there, I want you to raise your hand if you've ever built a small scale RO. All right, now I want you to think about you raising your hand. None of you have your video turned on. So I'm going to take it that most of you have tried to make an RO or have an RO or are thinking about an RO. For those that don't know anything about an RO, that stands for reverse osmosis. And so we're really talking about the good and the bad of do-it-yourself home ROs and what you can expect. I would encourage everyone to put in the comments, put in the Q&A session, questions as to how it will be. I know Chris has a few slides. I have a few slides because we built ours up here. And we can really talk about this in more of a fluid manner rather than just us talking about it. So Kevin is also one of our panelists. Kevin and Chris work very closely together. So when it comes to the questions and answers, Chris is the idea and money guy. I think Kevin is probably the hands-on builder of it. Right, Chris? Yep. There we go. So Chris, I'm going to let you share your screen and go ahead and talk a little bit. And then I will, when you're done sharing yours, click off of it, and then I will share mine, and we'll go from there, and we'll talk about it, and then we'll take some questions and answers.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jesse. I thought it was interesting when Jesse said, the sugar belt, and just to clarify, I am in far, far southern Illinois. I am a few minutes from Kentucky, and if you look at the range, the home range of sugar maple as a species, we are on that very, very southern tip of it. You don't have to go much farther south than where we're at here, and then you lose sugar maple as a species. And so making maple syrup here really does have some different challenges. Our winters are very, very variable. We have big warm spells in our winter. We have no snow cover for any amount of time. And so it's been different down here, and it means that you have to kind of take advantage when you can, and you'll have long periods where you've got nothing going on. But we wanted to really promote it down here kind of at a hobby level, a backyard level, trying to get people interested in this as an option. And to do this, Kevin and I work at the small ag center down here, and we built kind of a demonstration sugar bush. And so we have about 100 taps, and we slowly over the last 5-6 years kind of added new things to it on a small scale to demonstrate kind of production efficiencies, methods, and things like that. We even started with buckets and sacks and moved our way up. And so a couple years ago, we decided to add an RO system here, and we built it small. We built it kind of as a portable one that can demonstrate all the different parts. So you're seeing here kind of why we put it on a flat board so people can see what's going on and how it's operated. And again, this was really to demonstrate it as a process, as a tool to use for very small scale. So I'm going to kind of go over what we did and how we built it with the understanding that this is built for homeowners that have kind of went from a few taps and wanting to scale up a little bit. And so our homemade RO really, the uses materials and pieces that you can find at any home store, home and garden store. Basically, it's materials that are for water purification in drinking water purification, and we're just using it in a slightly different way. It ended up costing us right around $300 of materials, and I think that this system would be adequate for people that are up to maybe 150 to 200 taps. You can use this if you get more than that, or you have a lot more productivity in that, then you probably need to scale up beyond this. But for that small backyard person, somebody that's doing it at a hobby level, it has really, really improved our efficiency. It's improved our ability to handle sap when we get those bigger flows for us, those periodic flows. So it's useful in that scale. And I know Jesse's going to talk about kind of the next level up. But it's really simple. I mean, it basically uses a small pump that's up to 100 or 125 psi, electric pump. And then we have a basic pre-filter pressure gauge, again, ones that you would have in any kind of drinking water system. And then we have these 150 gallon per day reverse osmosis membranes, and we hook them up in parallel. So the sap goes through one, gets slightly concentrated, the permeate or pure water comes out and gets shunted off, and then the slightly more concentrated sap goes into the next one, and it just works through all four. You can do 2, you can go up to 6, however you want to do it. We chose 4. And then working your way through all of these, it'll get slightly more concentrated every time. And then it comes into our tanks. And that's really basically it. How we operate it, since we are in an area where we have a lot of higher daytime temperatures, sap spoilage is really a concern down here, and handling sap in these warmer temperatures is a challenge. And so what we often do is transfer our sap into a walk-in cooler. We just use small pumps, transfer pumps, and that way we keep it cold until we're ready to boil. So we often collect at the end of the day, put the sap into the cooler in tanks, and then we'll run our RO overnight in a recirculation. So it's just putting the concentrate back into the storage tank. And we found that this system can take 60 to 70 gallons of sap, and it'll concentrate it overnight down to 10 or 12 gallons. We start, our average sap here, sugar content is about 1.8%. And then in the morning, it'll be 8.2 or close to 9. And so for us, I mean, we're removing 80% of the water that way. It really helpful if you don't want, you can do it that way, or if you run it during the day and then just get enough and add it into your boiler, however you really want to do it. But this is kind of how we often do this. And it makes it really easy for our small scale hobby boiler. We just use a 2-foot by 4-foot boiler. So this really helps us out. The important things with this small one is we're using it in a different way than it was designed for, this material. So you have to really work on keeping it clean. You have to flush the system, back flush it with Permeate after every use, and then rotate those membrane canisters frequently. What happens is the last one in the line will tend to get clogged up and slow things down. So you move it to the first one and just kind of keep them rotating. We've had membranes, they last a couple years, it seems like, if you treat them well that way. But it works pretty well for us. Again, for our scale, we have about 100 taps, and this is kind of what the full system looks like in our walk-in cooler. We like it. I think in terms of pros, it's very inexpensive. So for a kind of hobbyist, it gives you ability to fairly inexpensively suddenly add a little level of efficiency, and you can step up your taps and not spend all your time boiling. The other thing is parts and supplies are easily found. You can go to any home store and pick these up. It's portable. You can build it in a different way in a cube, and it's very portable. Some of the cons of this system: one, it's a limited capacity. So if you're looking at really growing, you can outgrow it quickly once you get above that 150 taps or so. And it does require a bit of maintenance, since you're using this in a way that's different than kind of what it was designed for. Keeping up with the flushing of it is important, and it can clog a little bit here and there. So it does require a little more maintenance than probably other systems would. But again, for us, it's worked really well. Once we figured out and kind of how to use it, I think it's drastically helped us handle our sap and add a lot of efficiency of what we were looking for. And I'm going to just leave real quick my email up on the screen here. And I just wanted to hit it quickly, and then I'm going to let Jesse talk about his stuff, and then I think we can answer questions afterwards.
That sounds great. All right. So I am going to go here and share. All right. So hopefully, Chris, give me a nod if you can see my screen. There we go. All right. So really, this was the good and the bad of small reverse osmosis. And so a few questions came in from folks that had never heard of ROs or didn't know what they meant. What we're doing in this process, just as Chris talked about, we're concentrating sap. And he said he runs his overnight. The nice thing is you can run these ROs overnight while you're sleeping. You can't run your evaporator overnight while you're sleeping. You could try it the first time, but I guarantee you the evaporator will be gone in the morning. So what this is doing for those that aren't familiar with reverse osmosis, it's taking your raw sap, so 2% sugar, let's call it average, and under pressure, it's forcing that sap against the membrane. And anything pure water is small enough, anything with a molecular weight of 200 or less is going through the membrane. Anything with a molecular weight of 200 or more cannot go through the membrane. So pure water goes through the membrane and is being collected, and it's what Chris called permeate. The concentrate is what we're saving, and that's the concentrated sugar. And so in your home, when you're having reverse osmosis RO water in your home, you're drinking the permeate, and the concentrate is going down the drain that you don't see. So we just flip which one we save. We're saving the concentrate, throwing the permeate, all right? And so that is, in essence, what's going on. And now you have to understand there are different styles of membrane. There are different efficiencies in the membrane, and we're going to talk about those when you do it. Chris is using something that you can get at the home store or the big box stores. So you'll start to see what those efficiencies are. And Chris has already talked about the need to clean them and to rotate them. It's because over time, the sugar will begin to clog up in those, let's call them a pore space or a membrane space. And so you have to keep washing those and backwashing them and rinsing them off as you could. The reason we do this, and for all new producers out there, is we live and die by the rule of 86, meaning it takes 86 gallons of 1% sap to make a gallon of syrup, which means we have to lose 85 gallons of water either as steam or as permeate to make a gallon of liquid maple syrup. Now, if you can think about running it through let's say we start with 2%. So it's 43 gallons to 1. Let's say we run it through Chris's RO overnight and we go from 2% to 4% in one pass. In essence, now we're saying we have to make about 21 gallons of raw sap or concentrated sap. We have to run that across our boiler. So think about that. Now, we have half the volume of liquid that we have to boil off. We've just saved ourselves time, and we've saved ourselves a lot of fuel. While we were sleeping, the machine was running, and we get to 8%. Now we have 10 to 11 gallons of concentrated sap to boil. And so you can begin to see why even a small RO that removes half the water is going to save you in terms of time and energy. So when we came, we first bought a whole home RO unit. It was an easy way to get into it. It was rated at 1,000 or 1,500 gallons per day of permeate. When you buy a home RO unit, the gallons per day are not the concentrate. It's the permeate that you're producing because they were going into the home. So this one on the bottom left picture is our simple machine. you have to understand there's a few plumbing things that you have to first take out. The first is right down here, it was a 10 micron carbon filter. You don't want to have a carbon filter on an RO system. So we plumbed that out and just put a straight bypass there. All right. So that's the first thing you need to do. The second thing you need to do is there's a very expensive high pressure pump on all ROs because it takes pressure to force that water through the membrane. All right. So there's a very high pressure, very expensive pump that you do not want to burn up. So whatever you do when you get or build a home RO, make sure you put a very inexpensive low pressure safety switch. This is what's going to save the high pressure pump. All right. That very inexpensive, we're talking $15 to $20 on Amazon, low pressure switch. It will shut the switch off, which runs the power to the high pressure pump, if the incoming water line sees a drop in pressure. It's just a safety mechanism, and we'll talk about what happens when you don't do that in a minute. This unit that we purchased did not have a recirculation unit, so it's a lot like Chris's unit. This one was what I would consider a batch process. It would run through the membranes on the right-hand picture, and you can see the arrows for the flow of how that sap moves through those membranes. But it was only a single pass. They have machines that have recirculation on them. And so you have to understand when you're asking about ROs at the smaller scale, you need to ask, does it have a recirculation valve? And if it did, there would be another valve over here that would allow you to meter the amount of concentrated sap that goes back to the beginning and runs through. So when you get larger ROs, they have a built-in recirculation unit, a recirculation pump, which sends it right back through. And so you can, in one pass, go from 2% sap to 8, 10, 12. They are now making hybrid ROs that are getting into the 30 and low 40% sugar range. But you can imagine those are tens of thousands of dollars for those units at the starting size of those. One of the things I want you to understand with the do-it-yourself or the home RO units, as Chris alluded to, there's more cleaning, there's more washing, there's more storage issues. These are not meant to handle high volumes of sugar. So I made the mistake the first year. I didn't save all of my Permeate. I thought a 5 or 10 gallon Permeate wash would be enough, and it wasn't. I ruined my RO membranes and had to buy all new membranes because I didn't backwash it enough after every use. And so now I save all of the Permeate water that comes off of it. I run it back through as fast as I can, and the first 10, 15 gallons I dump on the ground. And that's where most of that wash sugar is going to end up. I then rinse it continuously with that clean Permeate. And at the end of the season, I go through my standard, I go through a wash cycle, I go through an acid cycle, and I go through a rinse cycle, and then I go through a storage cycle. And so when you buy a smaller RO unit, you're going to find it hard for the dealers that sell the wash and the stabilizers to really want to help you because they don't know which membranes are in it. They don't want to be, I don't want to say liable, but they're worried that their recipes and how they would have you maintain those machines are going to be wrong based on the fact they don't know the type of machine you're doing. So when you do your own RO or you adapt a home RO, you have to be real careful on the maintenance side of things and know you're going to go through some issues. And so just give you an idea, we did ruin some RO membranes when we were first starting out because we didn't handle them correctly, and that's just part of that learning curve. One thing I would say is if you're thinking about getting an RO, go talk to a producer or go visit a producer that has an RO and talk to them about the pros and cons of what they like about their RO and what they don't like about their RO. So being that we're talking about do-it-yourself ROs, we are all by nature, and I say we as in sugar makers, we're all cheap. We don't like to spend money. And a lot of times when we go visit other producers, we carry a camera on a cell phone or something like that, and we'll sneak pictures of various things in the sugar house. And one day I was at an event and I saw an RO that was built on a unit just like this one. And I snapped several photos of it because I was just in awe of it. At least that's what I told the person. And I came back and I said, you know what? I am going to save myself tons of money by having my guys build the exact same thing. What you're looking at on the left is what we built. The first thing you have to understand about a do-it-yourself RO is this is a glorified plumbing project. So minimum 4 trips to the hardware store. By about the 3rd trip to the hardware store, you're going to buy yourself 2 different tools that you don't even need because you're going to feel so bad and need a pick-me-up. Fittings are going to be, blowing up. You got to buy pressure fittings. You got to buy the right pressure gauges, the right pumps. You're going to think you're saving money until your spouse has you add up what you have into it, and you're quickly going to find you didn't save as much as you thought. If you value your time anything more than 0 for what you're paying yourself, you're not going to save money. This unit had very few bells and whistles. It's not an automated system. It did not have a low pressure cutoff. And guess what happened the first time? One of my guys forgot to shut this off. And I'm going to throw my guys under the bus because they're not here right now. It might have been me that forgot to shut it off. But the first thing you do is you burn up that high pressure pump. It cannot run empty. All right. The other thing that we're going to do to this, as you're concentrating your sap, you're also concentrating bacteria. You're concentrating things that might have picked up in the lines, like yeast or mold if you haven't sanitized your lines. You're concentrating those things as well. And so this year, we're going to go ahead and add an inline UV sterilizer. And again, what we learned quickly with this unit, you need to rinse and clean way more than you think. Specifically, we have gotten much better about changing out our inline pre-filters. They're very cheap. It's cheap insurance to take that inline filter, throw it out, and put a new one in. Don't think you can run the entire season on the same inline pre-filter. You can't do it. You shouldn't do it. When you take that off and it smells bad, that's a problem, and that should tell you you need to change your inline pre-filters a lot more. Also means, like Chris talked about, your warmer temperatures, you're getting more bacteria and yeast growth. You need to be even handling that sap faster. All right. Now, this unit has a modified, and I'm going to put it right up here, that turn valve. That is our recirculation unit. So this unit does have the ability to recirculate sap. And so we can go from 2% to 8% in one pass with this unit. What you're looking at is roughly $2,000. And that's what we did, added up without time or 4 trips to the plumbing store. All right. We did not value our time at all for this $2,000 build. And I can tell you, we have burned up at least 1 high pressure pump, and we have a second one just as a backup system. So know that we are constantly changing it. If anybody would like, email me. I have where we bought every piece and what we ordered and how we did it, and I'll gladly give it to you. We're running about 300 to 400 tap operation right now. On and through this unit, it's worked flawlessly. We clean it incessantly, but these are 2 4-inch by 40-inch membranes, so we have some really good capacity here. Again, this was a do-it-yourself step up from that homeowner version. But if you only had 100 or 200 taps, you could get away with running just one RO post. And so when you hear the terms out there, a one post or two post, normally you're thinking in terms of the capacity that machine can handle. So industry really has taken notice for those producers that are smaller, like Chris talked about. There are several out there, and one entrepreneurial person started making what Chris had made, but they put it in a 5-gallon bucket, and they called it the RO bucket. You can find them online. They come with 1, 2, 3, 4 membranes. And several of the other major manufacturers have come out with smaller RO units. And if you're not handy in plumbing, if you want the automation, if you value your time, you will probably look at one of those more commercially produced machines. What you're buying there is the service on the backside, how it's cleaned, how it's maintained, how the membranes are washed and put away for the year. But there's more options now for producers in the 50 taps and up range that are commercially available. So I would encourage you to shop around and look for them at your local equipment dealers and stuff like that. If you have questions about why your system isn't working, now is the time to ask. Let's run all questions through Chris. But I'm kidding there. I'll take questions. Get a hold of us and we can do that as well. All right, just to show you that they are making these smaller ones, no implied preference here. Leader has them, CDL has them, LaPierre has them, H2O, Memprotech. They all have now smaller RO units. Okay, so with that, I feel like I've talked way more than I should have. I am going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to look at the questions because I see I have thoroughly confused probably most people, and we actually have questions. All right.
Let me jump into that first one, Jesse. Somebody asked about marginal sites for growing sugar maple, and at the edge of its range, is the sugar content less? I think it's a little variable. Even down here, if we have our south-facing slopes, rocky slopes, our sugar content varies between 1.5% to 1.8%. But on our higher quality sites and east slopes, we're at 2 to 2.5%. It's kind of what we're at. So I don't think it varies wildly across its range. It's probably more variable on the individual sites or individual trees.
And yeah, I'm gonna second that. We can. One of the greatest things we can do is, one, stay on this talk after lunch, because Adam Wild from Cornell is going to be talking about sugar bush management. And so when you talk about even marginal sites, there are ways to promote your maple trees to grow more leaves. More leaves in turn means more sugar. So we can adjust our crown capacity to make more sugar, even on marginal sites. And so, Adam is going to do a great job talking about some of the research work they've done at the Eline Forest with Cornell University. So sorry to jump in. Chris, can you tell us on your $300 home-built option, kind of how many gallons per hour were you pushing through that, or kind of how does that equate?
And I'll let Kevin jump in here with this one too, but since mostly we run ours as a recirculate, it's running all night, so it's hard to figure out exactly how many gallons per hour. We've tested it, and we go from our 1.8 to 2%, somewhere around 4.1 with one pass. But then it's just going to slow down after that for ours, because it's going to take it a lot more effort and a lot higher pressure to try to get it up to that 8%. But I don't know. What do you think, Kevin, in terms of one pass, like how many gallons per hour will that handle?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know, because we haven't really done it that way.
Not much. I would say more than 20, 25, probably max for us. It can push through in an hour.
And some of that's going to depend on the membranes that you have and the pressures that those membranes can handle. And so that's a very important thing to mention. Not all membranes are the same. And so there are going to be pressure ranges that they run optimally at. You also have to, when you look at those membrane packages or you get online to find membranes, you need to look at, and most of those membranes are calculated at 65 to 70 degree temperature. Well, if we're putting 70-degree sap in there, you might as well dump it on the ground, all right? So your productivity through the membrane is going to decrease as it gets colder, all right? And so you need to kind of read those pressures and the gallons per minute as a rough guide as to at those warmer temperatures. And Steve Childs, I'll just put out Steve Childs with he's retired from Cornell, but you can find several YouTube videos if you type in Steve Childs, Childs, and Cornell University. You can find him talking about different scales of home-built ROs and how he runs them and how he selects membranes and how they function. He's a great resource for these home RO units.
And what we did with ours to kind of figure out the right pressure is we adjusted the pressure and changed it and basically increased the pressure until, and then kept measuring the permeate until we started getting sugar in the permeate. And at that point, we backed the pressure off a little bit. So we tried to get it as fast as we could, move as much sap through it as we could without actually losing sugar into the permeate. And so we played with it that way to kind of find what was our optimal pressure for our machine.
Sure. So you have to understand on these batch units, sometimes it's more advantageous to run sap across it faster because what it's doing is it's actually pushing the sugars off of the membrane such that it doesn't clog up. So the faster you run it, it keeps your membranes cleaner longer than if you were forcing, and you can jack the pressure right up and force those membranes. And like Chris said, you can force sugar into that permeate. So a question came up is, what is permeate for flushing? Permeate is the pure water that you're separating out from the sap. We gather that pure water, and rather than send it down the drain or out onto the ground, we keep the pure water to flush the sugars off the membranes at the end of that cycle of concentrating. So concentrate to permeate ratio, what is yours?
For one run, it's almost 50-50 at first, I guess. Like We'll take about half of it out to permeate with the first run.
And then it slows down.
It slows down a lot, yeah.
Yep. In our one pass operations, we can remove it'll seem like we are gaining concentrate really slow and the permeate's running out of our 2-post unit. We're taking on one pass. We might be taking 60-70% out through that one pass, but then we'll begin to slow down. But yeah, we can make a lot of permeate in a hurry with that 2-post unit running higher pressures. All right, I gotta. Okay, so question: when you bought your membranes, Chris, for your unit, are all of the filter cartridges that you bought, are they all the same, or are there different filters for different areas in the membrane or in those housings?
So we have the same filter, that's exact same filter that's all in a series, and then we just re-rotate them.
Okay.
And so basically after every few times, we'll take the last one and move it to the front one and then just keep them in line like that.
Okay. Now, Kurt, that was for you. If that wasn't what your question was asking, get back a hold of me. But I think I got that one handled. All right. So somebody asked, I built a 4x40 single RO, and I'm getting roughly 30 gallons per hour of permeate, 12 gallons per hour of concentrate at 8%, running around 200 PSI. Is it right to assume if I add another membrane, I could double my numbers to 60 and 24 gallons of permeate? Why? Oh, there we go. That's a good question. I'm going to be honest. I don't know if adding membranes is a linear relationship or a declining. So I'd have to look. I guess it also would ask, are you running it in parallel or are you running it in series on that one? If you listen to, again, Mr. Childs out at Cornell, a lot of times when he's adding membranes to his systems, he is not putting them in series because he wants to look at the productivity of and get away from what Chris is talking about, where the last membrane seems to clog up faster than the other ones, and it adjusts your pressures throughout the entire system. And so Steve likes to run things in, let me make sure I'm getting my terms right. He runs the sap in and the concentrate out, and he doesn't recirculate it through each of the membranes like my systems are running. He wants to test concentrations out of each one individually and know if he needs to wash it. So the honest truth from my perspective, I don't know if it's a linear relationship. So I'm going to figure that out. Unfortunately, you were anonymous, so send me an email after this and I'll look into that question. Okay, another person asks, we have an older style sugar house that isn't insulated. If we set up an RO in the building and it's too cold, what's the solution? This is a perfect opportunity for you to build an insulated sugar house now, brand new. We heard from Andy and how to go about ag lending and build yourself a new insulated sugar house, but that is a major concern. So what did we do? Because we have our RO in a non-insulated, it's in a non-heated portion of our building until our new building gets built. What we did is we built a tiny little insulated room, super insulated room for the RO. When it's running, we found that just the heat off of the motors is enough to keep it well above freezing, but not into the 40s where our sap can spoil if it's in there. We also put a very small, like a milk house heater in that room and put it to a very good thermostat such that it would kick on and insulate or, heat just enough that it didn't do it. New manufacturers that are coming out have gotten away from that where it sits right on top of the tank, and when it shuts off, it can automatically drain itself. And so it is freeze protection for those non-insulated. So some of the major manufacturers have already thought of that. So you do not want to freeze. So two things: you never run your high pressure pumps dry, and you never freeze your RO. All right, that's a big thing. You either make it portable like we have on wheels, or you put a little bit of a heat chamber around it. So that's a big thing. You can't let these guys freeze.
And we have this different problem here in far southern Illinois is we're worried about getting too warm and spoiling sap. So we put ours in a walk-in cooler that's set at 35, 36 degrees, and it keeps it cold for us just right. And if it does happen to freeze at night, that cooler has enough insulation and things that it's not going to get down below freezing. So it works for us.
So another question that came in, and here is somebody automatically thinking of a value-added maple products, and they ask, can you sell the Permeate water as a healthy mineral-enriched sap? Well, remember, we're separating that at basically the pharmaceutical grade water. So it really, if you've had Permeate water, it doesn't taste like much. It's all in the branding and marketing and what you put on that label. And if you're a good salesperson, sure. We use all our Permeate to wash with, to backflow that RO. If you're starting off at a very large scale and you want to have a bottling line, sure. Just make sure it's tested and stuff like that. Make sure it follows FDA rules and your local ag department rules. Somebody out there will buy anything if you market it correctly, but just know there are probably rules surrounding bottled water, especially maple bottled water, because what you're selling is Permeate, which should be, unless you forced things through the membrane that shouldn't have gone through it, you're selling pure water. So, but I like where you're thinking. You're thinking of selling into this new craze of health. Next question, how does RO affect syrup quality? And we hear this a lot. Folks don't want to go towards RO because they have it in their mind that it's going to affect the flavor. A few things will affect the syrup flavor. One is if you start getting in to that very high percent sugar out of the RO. Let's say we're 20, 30, 40% coming out of an RO with some of the new RO machines. What's actually affecting the flavor is not the RO, but what's affecting the flavor is the lack of time it has spent on the evaporator. All right. It doesn't need to boil off as much. So it's not getting the caramelization across those pans as long as it would. I would encourage you to get on, again, I use YouTube a lot. Look up the Proctor Center at University of Vermont, and you'll see a video that Tim Perkins has put out where they have an Hybrix RO, and they actually have a new evaporator that has a very small back flue pan and a very long syrup pan or multiple syrup pans. What they have done is they've taken the boiling rate and they've kind of slowed it down a little bit because they don't need to boil off as much. What they need to do and what they are doing with that new evaporators, they're adjusting their boil time. They're adjusting their residence time that sugar is caramelizing. That's where you get your flavor. You get, and people say, well, what if I get an off flavor from my RO? It probably means that you left your sap and you spoiled your sap, or you didn't clean it right, or most importantly, you didn't rinse it after you cleaned it. So ROs should not adjust your flavor. It's the boiling time that adjusts your flavor and your sanitation practices. All right, Chris, anything?
There has been, I just a couple of days ago was reading a couple studies on that where they did taste testing, and they found that there was really no difference in concentrated syrup produced from raw sap or concentrated through an RO. The one thing I thought was interesting is they did find some color differences, and overall, in some cases, the color was a little bit darker from RO. And I don't know necessarily why. They thought it might have been some of that concentration of, like you were saying, the microbes, and it might have darkened it a little bit. But other than that, they said there was no difference in taste, quality, clarity, anything like that.
Okay. Well, yeah, I've heard all sides of that argument, and yeah. I can tell you, we've run batches without an RO. We've run batches with an RO. We don't taste the difference. It's got that same 100% Michigan pure quality maple syrup, best place on earth to make maple syrup. That's my jab. That's the only one I'll give you. So Kay asked me, why do we discard the first few gallons of rinse water through the membrane as it is sugar rich? And I guess that I misspoke there, Kay. I didn't mean we dump it on the ground. If I said that, that was just a speaker glitch. I do capture that because it is sugar rich. And then I don't want to recirculate that into a permeate that I'm just going to keep rinsing. So I will gather that sugar rich sap and use it to make maple syrup. I will then continually, with my refractometer, I will check that coming off until I see all of the sugar is out of the rinse. And, as long as I'm using permeate water, I'll gather that and boil the concentrate. Once I see that it's just permeate coming out, I will let it either go on the ground or I'll recirculate that to rinse it as good as possible. So sorry, Kay. I didn't mean throw the sugar rich permeate wash out. Wouldn't it be beneficial to run sap through a DE filter prior to the pre-filter? I haven't heard of this. I think, where we use a DE filter is on the back end where we're taking any precipitate from the boiling process out, but I'm going to have to look unless somebody has come up with some new technology to run it through a food grade DE filter first. I know some researchers have looked at running, instead of just a standard 5 micron pre-filter, they're running it through a much finer under pressure filter press that is trying to remove more of the maybe yeasts and bacteria and that type of thing, but I'm not up on that one. But I don't think it's running it through a DE filter, but I'm going to check on that one. Sorry about that one. I haven't heard of that. Chris, have you heard of running it through a DE?
No.
Okay. Chris, do you have a parts list and source for the unit that you built? And can we come and see how it works? And that's a Tom Blaisdell. What I'm going to say, Tom, is get a hold of Chris. These guys love to show off what they have made. And I would encourage you, if you are in Illinois or anywhere down there, when Chris has his events, you need to get on his mailing list, and he'll walk you through this whole thing. And for those that aren't near Michigan or Illinois, get a hold of your extension agents, get a hold of your maple. There's somebody doing maple. There's some maple association in your state. Get on those mailing lists and go to those educational events. So there is a Chris or myself in almost every state or region running programs.
Yep. And so, Tom, shoot me an email. So it's cwevans@illinois.edu, and we'll figure it out.
So, Benjamin, you've asked me, do more leaves equal more sugar, or does that mean higher sugar percent or more sap volume? And I'm going to say yes to both of those. When you think of that crown capacity, the more crown capacity equals faster growth of the tree. It'll equal more sugar production potential, more starch, non-carbohydrate production and storage capacity, the faster the tree, and the more sap. It's a healthier tree. Healthier trees give you more sap and higher sugar content. So yes and yes. So that's why one of the things we've always kind of overlooked is our sugar bush management. And that's a really big next step that we have to be better stewards in our sugar bush with the existing trees. Oh, what is the membrane micron size and rated pressure you're pushing the sap through the membrane? Of course, the technical side, I want to remember we're about 8 angstroms. And again, that's going to depend on the membrane manufacturer that you have. So Kurt, if you get a hold of me, I'll run you through all of the different membranes that we have tried, and also the rated pressures that we have used and the rated pressures at which we see failure. Part of what we do at a research station is we break things on purpose so you don't have to. So get a hold of me, Kurt, and I'll run you through what we've tried and kind of where the industry is going right now, because there are high efficiency, low pressure, there's high efficiency, high pressure, and you really have to match your system, and if you're going to batch it or if you're going to recirculate it, and what your pressure pump can handle. Okay. For those that need to go, we are on lunch break, but we will get through all of the questions. Is Stu out of Minnesota has asked us, is Michigan raising questions about disposal of RO rinsing? At this time, I can tell you we are watching what's happening in Wisconsin and in other states. And what Stu has asked about that is when we rinse our ROs, we're using cleaning solutions. And like all chemicals, you need to be careful about where that goes in the environment. Is that going to go down the drain and out into the environment? I sit here and kind of with my official pin, I do not want you to think that dilution is the solution to pollution, all right? We need to understand what the chemicals are that we put into the environment, and if possible, and if you have a way to hold your rinse water, that is the chemical side of things, do it. If you have a septic system, it's best to probably put that in there. Don't just put it out over the ground, because eventually that's going to find its way into the groundwater. And it's going to be an increasing problem that I think all producers need to be cognizant of. I think it's something that we should not shy away from, that we need to address, proactively rather than reactively, because that's a better way to not get handed rules out there. So I don't know what's happening in Minnesota. We're eagerly watching Wisconsin. And Chris, do you guys have any rules down there that what you guys do?
No, not that I know of. I mean, we don't have a huge industry. I just don't know of any.
Okay. So again, a person has asked at Illinois, are you seeing an impact of your trees and the sugar contents due to global warming or climate change?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of predictions. We haven't been in it long enough in a longer time period to really see a a trend in the last 10 years or so I've been doing it. But it is of concern because where we're at, I mean, most of the predictions are for warmer climates and things like that, and actually sugar maple decreasing in its suitability for this region. So in this far southern bit of the range, it is a bit of a concern, like a long-term concern.
So I'm going to add to that. What's incredibly interesting and incredibly terrifying. I was just asked this question: how our soil temperatures and how our air temperatures are changing. Well, at this station, I have soil monitors and temperature monitors that go back to 2004. And I pulled the data from 2004 to 2020. And we, in January, went from an average of 26, 27 degrees at 10 centimeters of depth to 35. Almost a linear relationship across the years. We are gaining soil temperature. We are gaining it in January. We are gaining it in February. If you're a sugar maker, that should be terrifying. If we're seeing that level of temperature change in our soils in the UP of Michigan, and you're on that fringe of, Illinois, Indiana, down in through Ohio, your seasons are going to contract because you don't have that cold capacity in the soils. So it's, that's a major component of how we move forward, and it's something we need to be more cognizant and look at. Okay, don't forget to talk about used old technology that's available on the market, single post ROs. They are available for around $2,000. So yes, absolutely, there are smaller, not smaller, but older machines that if you want to get into making syrup, look at, Maple Trader, look at some of these industry-driven news sources that you can find out there. I know Peter Gregg is on, and he runs a major maple news outlet, and they constantly have consignments. Look at your local equipment dealers and get a hold of them. Call around, shop around, and look for used equipment. It's out there. Just make sure you want to know what those service records are. You want to know how old the membranes are, how old the pumps are, if they've ever been rebuilt, where and when they've been last serviced, and if they have been professionally serviced. Ask all those questions. It's a lot like buying a used car. Never buy a used car from a family member. I'm just going to say it. Only bad things happen when you buy used maple equipment from family members. All right. All right, we've covered that one. All right, from Jim. Thanks, Jim. He's pretty much clarified. He's pretty sure that if you run two membranes in parallel, it will double the output if your high-pressure pump can handle the extra volume at the same pressure. So thanks, Jim. So that was back in reference to a question of, is it a linear relationship if you add a second post? All of it depends on if your pump can handle that pressure. So thank you, Jim. Hey, I like it, Tim. Thanks. Go Michigan. Well, wait a minute. No, not the University of Michigan, Michigan State. Chris, so this is coming in for you. What is the sap season here in Southern Illinois? My Amish neighbor has been collecting the last 3 to 4 weeks, gave me a small batch, and it tasted pretty good. So when do you normally make down there in the southern region?
So we start tapping the first week in January, and that's because we do it at the office and things, and so we want to avoid Christmas break. But honestly, sap's running here usually the middle of December. Wow. And it'll last until, depending on when things warm up, but middle of February is kind of when we usually, it starts getting where you can't use the sap anymore.
Okay.
So a lot earlier than you.
Cool. Okay, so a question has come in, and it's more of a comment that they make maple candy and they've not been able to use syrup that's gone through an RO to do that. Now, we're going to hold off answering that very question, Ivy, because We have Eileen Downs from Early Maple, who is going to talk about this very thing with invert levels in maple syrup. So if I don't remember to ask your question, please, when she is speaking this afternoon, please chime back in. I will tell you that all of our syrup runs through an RO. All of my family syrup runs through an RO. We do check invert levels, but we, as long as we pick the right syrup with the right invert levels, we have had no problem making any of the maple confections, but we do test for it. But this is a question that is more appropriate that Eileen addresses in her talk. And if she doesn't, we will ask it for you there. She is a food chemist, and this lady makes wonderful maple confections and a lot of maple confections. So I would say I'm not the person to answer that question, and she will be on later. So Tim has asked, can you use TDS, total dissolved solids indicator, to tune your pressures? So really, yeah, TDS is just a measure kind of what you're going to push through that membrane. And if your pressure gets too high, your TDS should go up. A lot of it is if we're, we don't have that measure, what we're doing is we're looking at our refractometer levels, and we're checking our permeate for any traces of sugar in there. Because if I'm picking up sugar in my permeate, it means my pressures are too high and I need to back down. Chris, what are you, on your unit, what are you running for pressures on your unit?
I'm going to let Kevin answer that. He's the one that's a little more familiar with that, so I don't want to steer you wrong.
Yeah, we're running right about 85 PSI with ours.
Okay. All right, and then thanks, Kevin. So what's the comparison in efficiencies between an RO and a steam away? Again, I am not a person really to speak of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have to look at those efficiencies probably over lunch because we've only run an RO. After I left home and kind of became an adult, my dad got a steam away. He made things a lot easier because I wasn't around to help him. So I can't speak to what those efficiencies are. We run back home both an RO and a steam away system, mainly because we're trying to be as efficient as possible. And so let me look those up, and I will get back to you on one of our breaks, Ivan, about that. Again, when it comes to the technologies, I would encourage you to watch our website, because as we meet with the industry folks that are doing the R&D while we're making our video series for the Maple Manual, we are addressing all of those things because really those manufacturers have done the product testing and really have those numbers. And that's really how we're going to drill down and go through each of these video series. And we're looking to start putting those out with USDA's blessing by this summer. And so talk to the equipment dealers, talk to several equipment dealers, and start to average out those numbers. All right. Oh, geez, you're killing me, Steve. So Steve has asked, when is the best time of year to kill unwanted sugar maple trees? And what herbicides can be used for a cut stump method? Okay, so hopefully you're not wanting to kill all of your maple trees because you're looking for an oak hickory forest. You're just trying to kill maple trees that are competing with the crowns of other trees. Let's take the latter approach. So the nice thing with maples, you don't ever want to kill a tree in the spring, early summer, because all of your movement is up. It's providing nutrients and water up to the leaves. So when we look at unwanted trees, we're looking for when things reverse and are being pulled down into the root system and trying to kill those trees later in that growing season, end of August, September, October, and really up until freeze up, we're out there killing those trees. I will say I'm not a big fan of using any chemical in a sugar bush for fear of translocation, and you need to watch out and make sure the chemicals do not translocate. So when I say translocate, like a Roundup, if you did that on a cut surface, it can go down the stem through the soil or through the roots. And if those roots have grafted together, it can kill the other tree. All right. We want to be very careful with that. For a sugar maple, they are a shade tolerant tree. What I find is I prune those trees at ground level and they will sprout. I don't put any chemical on them. Let them sprout. The deer will eat them. The rabbits will chew on them. They're going to grow slow because they're shade tolerant trees anyways. So I normally don't use an herbicide. If I'm killing an ironwood or if I'm killing a honey locust, I'll add some chemical, but I'll be very careful. And I would encourage you, Steve, both Chris and I know we have talks online about killing unwanted trees and shrubs using different chemicals. So I would look that up and follow those label recommendations. And there are approved chemicals for those trees and what you're trying to kill. Chris?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. We do a lot of oak hickory management down here, and so we do kill a whole lot of sugar maples. And we got some studies in there, and sugar maple's an interesting one where because it runs and the sap runs, you've got a narrower window than other trees. So we've treated in early December and had complete failures with sugar maples because literally we would do injections and then you come back 5 minutes later and the sap had just pushed all of the herbicide out of the tree. So you just have to be careful with temperature, and it's a little bit tighter of a window with sugar maple than just about any other tree.